Masal's literary elaborations pays homage to his close friend and colleague Edward Said, along with whom he engaged literature and culture as a decidedly worldly phenomenon. In this essay, together with Turn to the Planet, the two works that bookend Eric Kadzin's thoughtfully edited volume, Trespasses, we can see the important and central mediating role given to the university in knowledge production, which occupied Masal's critical attentions over the last few decades. As he trenchantly revisits the trajectory of the novel, critical theory, knowledge, and institutions amidst the necessity engendered by changing social realities, we observe his concerns shifting pointedly from the worldly to the planetary. In the shift from one to the other, the agent too shifts from humans who build and work within systems, modes of production, labor, consumption, and so forth, to an all-inclusive nature, especially natural calamities that are both the effects of those practices of human subjects as they are in turn the determinants of their very survival. In the process, Masal refers repeatedly to the question of that subject agent, in other words, the human, uneasy with the way it assumes its sovereignty and centrality that in turn fuels their unreflective use of nature and all that it creates out of it as an unquestioned birthright. To these provocations, with Masal as interlocutor, as surely as he will remain for me, I wish to urge him to engage the ignored level of the individual and to have it inform his program and call for an inclusive totality. His exhortation for inclusion is an urgent one that recognizes the human as at once the direct cause of impending catastrophe for which there is no outside, and the need to shed the anthropocentrism that has exceeded even the legacy of humanism and the celebration of human subjectivity, as opposed to God, kings, and other forms of still human-made subjectivities, into the unreflective and even unbridled affirmation of human exceptionalism within which we live today. Masal's essays direct us to bring learning and knowledge in line with planetary necessity as never before, and the position from which he urges us to examine, study, and help reshape the agency of humans and the systems of production they create, even as he calls for decentering the human, is that of an academic who must examine one's theoretical critical assumptions and realign his or her objectives. Motivated by a desire to contest existing structures of wholeness, theory, he notes, turn to a logic of difference and diversification. I quote, "The new social agenda is to recognize and insist on individual varieties, incommensurable differences," end quote. The affirmation of smaller minoritarian groups and identities has made totality taboo, avoided, distrusted. Quote, "The new social agenda is to recognize and insist on individual varieties, incommensurable differences," end quote. The time of strategic essentialist categories may not be entirely over, but as I otherwise share his charges here, to his urgings, let me ask not for individual difference, but rather ways of attending to individual sentience and experienced life in a way that supplements his critique of a multicultural identitarianism that after all are groups and abstractions. As academics, we trade in abstractions, of course, but we ought to heed the challenge Masal makes against maintaining such horizons, along with his call to displace the unreflective assumption of a human-centered world. Thus, the logic of the individual, that is different from that of similitude, helps us counter the insidiousness of the logic of category, such as slaves or women or species. In other words, socially constructed abstractions that testify to the history of human subjugation of animals and humans for their use value, and in more recent centuries, their exchange value. In any case, surely their status as things. Today, we find certain classes of animals given special consideration. For example, classification as an endangered species seems to merit species-saving measures and interventions, even as it almost never translates into concern for any specific individual endangered animal, as the saving is reserved simply for the abstract group or number. You can kill, trap, maim, or capture them as long as you honor the endangered threshold. But unless we can see, feel, and think the animal in these individual terms, their immiseration as commodity is likely to keep ascending, especially domesticated varieties that are cash crops, as they were. We encounter the limits of environmental or perhaps planetary thinking here, and it seems like with the call Masal makes, we must urge individual thinking in the way we have cast it into oblivion, to which we may well be headed anyway. The ecofeminist scholar of animal issues, Marty Keel, urges individual animal concern this way in outlining her book, quote, I argue that holist theorists fail to examine the unconscious factors that promote or discourage the development of feelings of care and empathy for individual other than humans. John Gray, the philosopher, addresses the abstraction to the individual level bluntly, quote, humanity does not exist. They're only humans, driven by conflicting needs and illusions, and subject to every kind of infirmity of will and judgment, end quote. The distance between abstract animal and individual is illustrated by our ability to see sentience in individual animals and ignore it by supporting or allowing its individual members to be brutalized in rodeos, caged in zoos, pushed and drugged to their limits in horse, greyhound, and other track racing, tortured with Dre's tests and other needless tests as a hedge against possible future litigation. And so, in a kind of not-so-quiet desperation, let me turn to the Wall Street demonstrators and the status of corporate personhood for a way out that cannot be but laced with much skepticism. Many of the Occupy Wall Street demonstrators have rightly called for the repeal of laws and practices that led to the legal designation of corporations as individuals in 19th century America, which in turn underwrites their present-day ascendance and domination of the political economy of our nation and the world. The absurdity of corporate personhood raises a perhaps desperate but far more reasoned call for granting individual personhood to animals in a world that seems so human-centered that the route taken to either elevate corporations or in this case to protect animals must be made first by redefining them as human. The classifications we have given to them over the millennia hide their reduction to commodities and insentience. For example, their species designation as socially constructed species, food, such as pork, lab rats, which of course include huge populations of primates, dogs, cats, etc., or their domestication that justifies turning them into food, playthings, or fashion, treating them as things to be experimented on with each tweaking of a shampoo formula or most other utterly unnecessarily scientific testing. And as is well established, the rise of fast food chains and the resulting steep rise in animal production and consumption throughout the globe has become an even more devastating cause of environmental degradation than our use of cars and fossil fuel-based transportation. Unfinished and peripatetic, I tried to link some of the thoughts engendered by your later works, Miss Owl, and the very tight compass within which I left a fireborn maze of insurance claims, construction work, and an ailing dog back in Irvine to attend to other familial crises over here in Tokyo, where I put the not-so-finishing touches on this short presentation. I'm not handling the demands of personal and academic tasks, as well as all of you who are in attendance there. Keep imagining you keep me an admixture of, and I keep imagining you giving me an admixture of pointed questions, admonition, and encouragement, perhaps with a few candid thoughts about my idiocy in the mix. But you unfailingly gave me your thoughts and suggestions as no one else I know, in a way that always made me feel seriously engaged and heard as no one else could. How grateful I am to have known you, Miss Owl, not just as the abstraction I get from your scholarly work, but for the individual that you were, and that surely informs your work for me. Thank you.